If you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
On Horse Chats today, we've got Camilla Whishaw back. How are you, Camilla?
I'm very well, thanks, Glenys. How are you?
Well, I'm well. I had a bit of trouble. I thought, now, what chat are we up to? But this is chat number 8, isn't it?
I honestly have lost count.
It is. Look, we've done a wide range of things, but for people who haven't come across Camilla's chats before, if you want to, you can go back to horsechats.com, search for Camilla, Camilla, and you'll bring them all up. So they're all very informative. It's a really good one to listen to that first chat, just to find out a bit more about Camilla. But if you don't know her, she's a highly experienced equine naturopath, which is why we keep getting it back. She consults and delivers educational lectures all over the place, including like nationally, overseas. But the reason we also get it back is her approach to equine health, well-being and performance. It's holistic and well-rounded. So she includes Western herbal medicine. She includes natural therapy. And she also addresses dietary management and lifestyle factors. And before we get started, Camilla, I just want to tell you about the motto of International Horse College, which is people's safety and horse welfare. So Camilla comes on to talk very much about horse welfare, to make sure our horses are being well looked after. And sometimes people think they're looking after their horses, but they really don't know. So International Horse College is registered training organisation 31352. And Camilla, like I said, people think that they're looking after their horses, and sometimes they just don't know. And there's a lot of myths around horses, particularly about feeding, nutrition and supplements. And I'd like to tell you a couple of myths, okay? I've got a few myths written down here, and I'd like you to answer them, to tell me and to tell our listeners if these myths are true or not true. So are you okay? Are you up for that?
That sounds like a great plan, Glenys. And I suppose that opens, a conversation really, really well, in that I like to have the belief that we are all doing the very best we can with the information and the knowledge and experience we've got. And, as we grow more and learn more, and as research evolves, what we commonly once believed or commonly once did can really change quite dramatically. So whatever field of life we're in, and whether it's horse related or not, I think it's really important not to beat ourselves up if we learn that maybe one way we approached something or did something wasn't the best way, but to allow ourselves a bit of grace.
Exactly.
And when we know better or know more, we can make more educated or more informed decisions. So hopefully today's conversation will help with that.
And I love the way that you're up to date with everything. You stay up to date, and then you just let us know the latest up-to-date information we can get. Now, thinking about, horses evolving and eating grass and everything else, okay, a lot of people think, a lot of grass in my paddock. It already contains, so grass contains all the nutrients a horse needs, because that's just people saying, well, I've got a paddock and the horse is there and they should be right. I shouldn't need to feed them at all. Does grass contain all the nutrients that a horse needs?
What a great myth to start with, Glenys. And certainly in clinical practice, this is one of the most common dietary related statements or questions I see or am asked. So first of all, I think if we've got a horse that's a good doer, or a pony that's a good doer, or in good condition, or even one that is slightly overweight, it's really easy for us to think that, well, they're in good condition, they don't need any more feed. In terms of grass, some horses and ponies may easily meet their calorie or energy requirements on grass alone, but they will fall short of key mineral needs. They may well fall short of some vitamin needs, depending on the time of year, depending on our horse's activity levels, life stage, reproductive status or growth stage. They may not get sufficient protein from grass alone. But I think it's really valuable to know that even on our best, most improved pastures, or conversely on the other end of the spectrum, our most native pastures, just the way modern agriculture and farming's, headed, and the way we've grown and depleted our soils and the different pesticides and herbicides and things we use, our soils aren't what they used to be. And certainly the grass that grows in them doesn't contain all the essential nutrients needed for optimal health in our horses and ponies or optimal performance, whether that be in the show ring, on the race course, whether it be in the breeding shed. So although grass may sustain our horses in terms of calorie or energy requirements, they won't meet key nutrient requirements. And just to emphasise, it's generally minerals more than anything else, but maybe protein, in some cases vitamin status, and they certainly won't meet dry matter fibre needs on grass alone. And I'm sure we can expand on dry matter fibre needs more.
What about, and it's sort of similar, if the horse is getting plenty of grass, you're talking about fibre, and do they need hay as well?
Okay, so again, great question. So if we look at grass is anywhere from 10 to 20% dry matter fibre for a really mature grass, but that means it's 80 to 90% water. Now, for our horses to have optimal gastrointestinal health, and gastrointestinal health is really, really important for our horses. It's central to their overall health. So just a bit of a side note, we know that gastrointestinal health significantly influences immune health. It affects inflammatory levels throughout the body. Gastrointestinal health facilitates the uptake and digestion and absorption of different nutrients. It plays a role in bone metabolism. It plays a role in metabolic rate. If our horses aren't getting sufficient dry matter fibre, to simplify, they don't have the best or healthiest gut microflora population they can have. And again, that healthy gut microflora population is absolutely essential to overall health. If we rely on grass alone to provide our horses with dry matter fibre, they'll fail to meet their dry matter fibre requirements because the majority of grass is water and very little fibre. Whereas hay is essentially the inverse. So if we look at the dry matter fibre content of hay, that's usually 80 to 90% dry matter fibre, give or take, with sort of 10 to 20% water content. So if we don't give our horses hay, they are going to fail to meet their dry matter fibre requirements, hay or other dry matter roughage. So again, one of those key nutrients horses won't get enough of if they're on grass is dry matter fibre, and dry matter fibre is essential to overall health.
I keep thinking about these myths, and where I grew up, there were a few bushies, you call them bushies, like they weren't educated, they didn't have any qualifications or anything else, but they'd been around horses all their life. And so, we're always told to, ask a good bushy. I remember when I was at Pony Club, I was doing my B certificate, I think, whatever it was, and I had to find out about founder. So I went to the library, which in those days, you sort of had to walk an hour to the bus and then catch the bus into town and go to the library, looked up books everywhere, every single horse book I could find. I couldn't find founder anywhere. Could not find founder, right? So I'm looking and looking and looking. And I had a few other things, ring bone, side bone, a few other odds and ends. And I matched them all up, wrote all the notes down, hand wrote them, and couldn't find any. But I found this thing called laminitis, and I thought I'll take a few notes anyway about laminitis. Anyway, I got back and someone said, "How did you go?" And I said, "I can't find this founder anywhere." Okay. And they said, "Oh, ring up such and such. He's an old bushy. He'll know."
Yes.
So I rang him up and I said, "Look, I've got lots of notes about laminitis, but none about founder."
Yeah.
And he said, "Glenys, just use your notes for laminitis and we'll call them founder." So, that's the sort, like, good information sometimes, because founder is typically an Australian thing. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the laminitis it's a little bit more broader. Founder might be part of, or you explain the difference between laminitis and founder. You're the expert. You can tell me.
That's a really good example to bring up, and it's something where terminology, we can mix and match words, meaning we think we're meaning one and the same, whereas often laminitis and founder go hand in hand, but from a veterinary perspective and from a physiological perspective, they're actually two separate yet potentially interrelated processes. So inside the hooves, we have what are called laminae, so these little leaf-like projections with good blood flow that hold the pedal bone or the coffin bone in place in the hoof. Now, in the case of laminitis, those little laminae, those little leaflets get inflamed, very sore, blood flow changes to them. They're susceptible to being stretched and damaged. So whenever we have a word that ends in itis, it refers to inflammation. So laminitis is inflammation of the laminae in the hooves. Now, founder is when the pedal bone, which sits in the laminae, drops and rotates. So we commonly get founder as a sequelae of laminitis, but it's very common to have laminitis without founder. And certainly we don't want laminitis and we don't want founder, but if we intervene and halt the laminitic process, then hopefully we can prevent founder. So it's not uncommon to hear people go, my horse is foundered, and you go, has it progressed to founder or is it in the stages of laminitis? And I think it's certainly not the only example. We talk about things like 𝐘𝐨𝐮'𝐵 disease, so what we now know as PPID in horses, but it was once referred to as 𝐘𝐨𝐮'𝐵 disease. But we don't use that terminology anymore from a veterinary perspective, yet it still comes up a lot in conversation. So there's slight technical differences, but in terms of horse health and horse medicine, they have different meanings.
So we're learning more and more,
Absolutely.
But this was, as I say, this was a bushy, and no disrespect to them, because they've learned by being it and doing it and talking to people, and they haven't just sort of jumped online and done a bit of research. They've put a lot more time and effort into their knowledge than we have, that because they've been with horses their whole life, whereas we can just, we can do, our research now, it's just so much easier to do, to just jump online and look in the library or look in the online library from your uni or something like that. It's so much easier than it used to be. And, we can sort of appreciate all the technology and everything that we've got. But another one I did want to talk about is if we've got horses that are prone to laminitis, some bushies say, just put them in a nothing paddock and just starve them for a bit, and when they lose the weight, we'll worry about it then. But starving horses that are laminitic, is that the way? Tell us a little bit about what happens if we do that.
No, and it's a really good point to bring up, Glenys. As a kid, I had a couple of ponies that were prone to laminitis. When we got them, they'd had several laminitic episodes, and that was the way we were taught to manage them, with their very best interests at heart and not knowing any better. The problem with starving laminitic horses, and we used to say, put old Bob's, the pony, in the Jenny Craig yard. So effectively, a gravel yard with no grass, nothing in there, and maybe give him a little bit of hay once a day. But not feeding those horses is really detrimental from several points of view. So any laminitic horse, any horse with insulin resistance or equine metabolic syndrome, and often those conditions will go hand in hand. We need to be really careful with feeding those horses too much non-structural carbohydrates, so they're starches and sugars, which cause rapid rises in blood glucose and blood insulin levels, and they also have the potential to adversely impact gut microflora. But there are several reasons why we don't want to starve these horses and ponies. One is they won't meet dry matter fibre requirements. So again, we're going to have significant impact on that healthy gastrointestinal microflora. And it would be worth going back and listening to some of our previous episodes. I know we've done some specific chats around gut health in horses. But we know in laminitis that changes or metabolic or endocrine cases of laminitis, as opposed to supporting limb laminitis, we know that adverse changes in gut microflora and the integrity of the gut lining, they precede laminitic changes in our horse. So one of the most important things we can do for those laminitic horses or those at risk of laminitis is have really healthy gut microflora. If we're not giving them sufficient fibre to do that, they are at increased risk of those adverse hindgut microflora changes, which makes them more susceptible to laminitis. We have the issue in that horses and ponies, by their very nature, are trickle feeders. They are designed to be constantly chewing hay or grass or roughage. From a physiological point of view, that's really important for a couple of reasons. When our horses chew, they produce saliva. So unlike humans, we produce saliva when we think about food, when we smell food, when we eat food. The majority of saliva production in horses only really occurs when they're chewing food. Now, that saliva contains a couple of things. It contains salivary amylase, which initiates carbohydrate digestion, but it also contains bicarbonate buffers, which are really, really important for protecting that non-glandular tissue in the upper stomach, so helping protect against gastric ulcers. The other thing fibre does is it provides a physical mat in the stomach, so it helps prevent hydrochloric acid, which is produced in the stomach, from direct contact with the gut lining, with the stomach lining, so it helps prevent gastric ulcers from that regard. And then that fibre ferments in the hindgut, which it's meant to. When it ferments in the hindgut, it produces different metabolites. One of them is a short-chain fatty acid called butyrate, and butyrate has a number of really important properties in our horses' health and well-being. So it's an anti-inflammatory substance, and it helps protect the gut lining and helps protect against the development of ulcers. It's also a really important metabolite for immune function. So again, if we take away them getting sufficient fibre and our horses and ponies chewing enough, we not only increase their risk and severity of laminitis, but we also compromise their gastrointestinal health and risk ulceration. If our horses are put into a starvation mode, it potentially increases the production and release of the stress hormone called cortisol, and that in itself can perpetuate the insulin-resistant state and laminitic state. So again, we don't want to do that. If we don't give our horses sufficient calories, vitamins, minerals, protein, they're going to fail to meet their key nutritional requirements. So that's not good in terms of health. And if we look at those laminitic horses and ponies, those with equine metabolic syndrome, typically just by the nature of the state their body is in, they often have higher mineral and nutrient requirements than a healthy horse. So these are certainly horses we don't want to starve. So we very much need to make sure we're meeting their nutritional requirements, but being very mindful of how we provide those nutrients to the horses. We also want to make sure that they don't go for extended periods of time without feed. And we also want to avoid them getting bored, or, a lot of these horses can develop stereotypies, so stereotypical behaviours, so things like windsucking, cribbing, weaving, if they don't have sufficient food. And often that can do with dopamine, so a neurotransmitter, a brain chemical, which can become quite low in their systems if they don't have enough fibre and they're not chewing enough. So we just need to be aware that although, essentially starving those horses might have been something that was recommended or we did in the past, it's certainly not advisable with what we know now, and making sure we've got the nutrition on point for those horses, making sure we meet their fibre and nutritional requirements, but not overdosing on non-structural carbohydrates and not overdosing on calories is really, really important for their health and recovery and preventing further episodes of laminitis.
Tell us another one, and this is about gastric ulcers, right? So a bit of a myth, they're caused by too much hydrochloric or gastric acid.
Yep.
Yeah, is that the cause, or are you going to tell me it's something else?
This is something I'm really passionate about. Certainly,
if you're really passionate about this, we've got the right person on then.
And certainly science tells us a lot here. So firstly, it's worth just going back to a horse's physiology, so what happens within their body. And the production of hydrochloric acid is essential for proper horse health and digestion and immune function. So again, our gastrointestinal systems work a little bit differently to horses. Horses are constantly producing hydrochloric acid or gastric acid. It's produced by cells called parietal G cells in the stomach. The way our horses' digestive systems are designed, or our horses are meant to be constantly grazing. So they're meant to be trickle feeders. So that hydrochloric acid is going to help initiate the first stages of digestion in our horses. It's really worth knowing that hydrochloric acid also plays an important first-line immune defense in our horses. So it can kill ingested pathogens and parasites. So not only is it really, really important for digestive function, but it's important for immune function. Now, from our research and from our understanding, unlike humans, where we have some evidence that in some cases humans can produce too much hydrochloric acid, which may or may not contribute to gastric ulcers, and again, that's quite a contentious issue. But in horses, we have no sufficient evidence to support that our horses produce too much hydrochloric acid. It's more that we don't feed and manage our horses in a way that's compatible with their digestive systems in many cases, and that's what's likely to lead to gastric ulcers. So knowing that, again, we want to go back to making sure our horses are getting sufficient dry matter fibre, particularly long stem fibre, so things like hay, which require a lot of chewing. And just going back to remembering that the more our horse chews, the more saliva they produce. It takes our horses roughly 850 jaw sweeps to consume 1 kilogram of oats. Now, again, our horses don't chew up and down. They have a grinding, sweeping motion. So it takes about 800 to 850 jaw sweeps in about 10 minutes for the average horse to consume 1 kilogram of oats. For the average horse to consume 1 kilogram of hay, it takes about 40 minutes and 4 times the amount of jaw sweeps. So that's a lot more saliva being produced. They're producing a lot more bicarbonate buffers, which help protect the gut lining. The physical presence of all that fibre from the hay in their stomach and then throughout their gastrointestinal tract protects that gut lining against the corrosive properties of hydrochloric acid. But if they're given the equivalent grain, that quickly passes through the stomach, again, leaving exposure to that hydrochloric acid. So for normal digestive function and normal immune function, we certainly don't want to shut down that hydrochloric acid production, which is one of the many reasons why the use, particularly the long-term use of ulcer medications. So in Australia and worldwide, typically our gold standard ulcer medication is omeprazole, or one of the injectable forms, esomeprazole. How that drug works, it belongs to a class of drugs called proton pump inhibitors. They stop the production of hydrochloric acid by those parietal G cells in the stomach. But without that hydrochloric acid, our horses can't initiate their first stages of digestion properly. They lose one of those important mechanisms of first-line immune defense. And without that hydrochloric acid production in the stomach, our horses are unable to properly break down and absorb key minerals, particularly divalent minerals like zinc and calcium and magnesium and iron. They also can't get those amino acids properly that they need for muscle repair and growth, musculoskeletal health, immune function. And then feed, which should have started to be digested in the stomach, then can pass to the small intestine, having not undergone those initial stages of digestion. Unfortunately, in this case, or fortunately, if we feed our horses properly, the pH of the food in the stomach influences the pH in the small intestine and the pH in the large intestine. Those pHs are region specific, but they're influenced by the region before. So if we change pH in the stomach, we change pH in the small intestine, we change pH in the large intestine. In the small intestine, that changes activity of normal digestive enzymes, which function in a very narrow range to assist our horses in digestion. And it also changes the gut microflora population throughout the whole gastrointestinal tract. And to oversimplify, there's healthy gut microflora, which helps reduce inflammation in our horses, helps support good bone health and metabolic rate, supports immune function. And we've got unhealthy microflora, which again increases inflammation, increases the risk of infection. And if we go and shut down hydrochloric acid production, we're not only disrupting normal, good stomach health, we're affecting the whole gastrointestinal tract, which can have a flow-on and a significant flow-on to immune function, musculoskeletal function, bone health, growth and development. There may be a small amount of evidence, but it's being challenged anyway, that horses on high-dose long-term omeprazole, so again, your proton pump inhibitors, those ulcer medications, if they're suddenly bought off that medication, then initially they may have high levels of hydrochloric acid, so what we call rebound hydrochloric acid production, although I believe research by Ben Sykes has challenged that. But we have no evidence that instance aside that they produce too much hydrochloric acid. So again, just drumming home the point that it's not that they produce too much hydrochloric acid, it's that we don't feed and manage them appropriately, or we expose them to substances or medications which compromise or change their gastrointestinal health function. So things like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, corticosteroids, antibiotics. And again, it's not that those medications don't have their place, because certainly when they're used judiciously, they can be really, really valuable. But it's making sure we come and address the side effects of those medications. And in many cases, where appropriate, supplementing nutritionally, dietarily, in my case, with appropriate herbal medicines alongside those medications to help counteract some of those side effects. I can't remember what the original question was, but I think it was the myth that horses produce
well
too
and
much
truly
hydrochloric acid.
Yeah. I think, and it's great because I can ask you a simple little question, it takes me 2 seconds, but then you go into so much depth and explain it. And it's not just, doesn't matter what the original question was, because you've then gone and explained it in such depth. It's just, very interesting. So I've got another one for you. Now, this is more to do with supplements, horse supplements, feed supplements, that they're natural. So because they're natural, they're harmless. Is that correct? Not correct? Tell us about that.
I'm glad you brought this one up, Glenys. And despite being a naturopath and someone who, uses a lot of natural supplements, whether that's nutritional supplements or herbal medicines in everyday practice, and I rely heavily on them in a lot of my cases, this myth scares me and it does make me cringe. And I think it's part of what can contribute to natural medicine having a bad rap in some cases. So there's several reasons why that statement really gives me the irks. In some parts of the world, Australia included, in many ways, there's a lack of regulation over what goes into supplements. So certainly there are bodies that supplement producers can pay to have their formulations regulated, but it's not compulsory. So there are plenty of supplements on the market that contain things that are not listed on the label. Some don't even have labels of their ingredients. Others don't contain what they say they do on the label. And unfortunately, there can be some pretty outrageous health claims made about supplements which aren't substantiated. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Many products may contain certain ingredients which may be useful, but they're often contained in such small amounts that they don't have a therapeutic effect on our horses or a minimal benefit. Other supplements may contain good amounts of nutrients, but have them in forms which have what we call poor bioavailability or low bioavailability. So that relates to how well our horses can digest and utilise and absorb feed. And different vitamins and different minerals are bound to different molecules, and that influences how well our horses digest, absorb and utilise them. Generally speaking, products or ingredients with better bioavailability tend to be more expensive, which again, we all like a bargain. So, and I think it's fair to say, most supplement producers, feed producers want to make a profit. That's how they make their money. So they're probably going to choose a form or some forms with poorer bioavailability. So that's worth noting. When we look at herbs and herbal medicines in particular, many herbs are contraindicated in different states. So some herbs which may be really useful in chronic infections may be contraindicated in acute infections and vice versa. Some herbs are definitely contraindicated in pregnancy and lactation. And again, if we hear that a particular herb is great, we might go and use it without a full understanding, and we may put our horse's health at risk doing that. In terms of herbs, we need to be very aware of ruling around FEI or EA for in Australia, or if we've got racehorses, different racing jurisdictions. So being really cognizant of that. And again, unless we're sourcing products produced in Australia under the TGA, then we've got a really shady area in that herbal medicines can be adulterated or contain substances that we're not aware of. So being really mindful of that. Some minerals that we may use and think are great. A classic one I see in practice is people have had their horses on high-dose magnesium for extended periods of time, often with the belief that it may help calm their horses. But magnesium is what we call a divalent mineral, and if we supplement that in high amounts and or for extended periods of time, we disrupt the balance and absorption of other minerals. So inadvertently, we can cause our horse mineral insufficiencies and deficiencies. So being very, very mindful that by doing that, we can cause issues. We can certainly cause issues by giving some minerals in high amounts that can be toxic. So Certainly lack of minerals or lack of nutrients can be a health concern, but so can too much. So it's sort of the Goldilocks, getting the right amount. But something like selenium, if we have our horses on a highly concentrated diet, they could be getting a lot of selenium through that. And then we add a selenium supplementation on that. We add a coat conditioner on top of that. We add a hoof supplement on that. We add up the maths and we can suddenly have really alarmingly high amounts of particular minerals. So again, keeping that in mind, different herbs and nutrients and drugs can all interact with each other. So again, if we're doing a bit of willy-nilly supplementation or giving a bit of this and a bit of that, we can be changing the metabolism of different pharmaceutical medications our horses may be on, or even different natural supplements, so whether that be nutritional supplements or herbs. So just keeping in mind that nothing works in isolation. We can look at something, I had a case today, so vitamin C can be a really beneficial supplement in some cases, and I think we would often look at it as relatively benign. Yet our horses, when they're healthy, not under too much stress, they actually synthesize sufficient vitamin C through their liver. If we go and supplement high-dose vitamin C for long periods of time, we can actually down-regulate their own production of vitamin C, which can remain even after we've taken them off vitamin C supplementation. So just being aware that even healthy supplements used without careful consideration can, not be so safe. And then we can look at a whole different context. And the example that comes to mind, and going back to our laminitis conversation, is unfortunately something that's categorised as a feed supplement, and that's called FounderGuard. We think it's a feed supplement. It must be natural. The key ingredient in FounderGuard is virginiamycin, which is a type of antibiotic, which has since 2014 been completely banned for animal use in the UK, just due to increased antimicrobial resistance. And it was deemed that virginiamycin was not effective in preventing or treating laminitis. So again, something that in Australia and New Zealand is touted as preventing laminitis, having that claim countered by veterinary medicine's doctorate in the UK just goes to show that, we need to be really mindful about what we use. And again, looking at that example, we know that the use of antibiotics disrupt gut microflora. If we take our horses or ponies off that supplement, they've had really significant adverse impacts on their gut microflora and the integrity of their gut lining, which actually can make them far more susceptible to further episodes of laminitis. So natural always sounds nice, or feed supplements sound nice, but I think it's always understanding the context of how we're using something, why we're using something, the potential benefits and the potential risk factors, and applying that to the individual horse or pony in front of us.
I'd like to ask about a feed that's been used for a long time, namely oats. So, a lot of people, oats are a good source of nutrients. Tell us a bit about the latest research for oats. Are they still considered a good source of nutrients?
Great question. So again, going back as a kid, sort of thought that, feed our horse, they have good fresh grass, bit of oats, bit of lucerne, they'll get all their nutrient needs. Oats are a good source of energy, so a good source of calories in that they're highly concentrated in calories. The majority of that energy comes from starch and a little bit from sugars. In terms of nutrients aside from that, they provide a bit of phosphorus, but they provide very, very little in terms of other minerals. They contain low to moderate amounts of protein, so horses aren't going to get enough protein if they're just chomping down on oats and grass. They're going to fall short of different minerals, different mineral requirements. And the fact that oats are quite high in phosphorus but very low in calcium. Calcium and phosphorus ratio is something we often talk quite extensively about in terms of bone health and growth and development. So, oats aren't going to help contribute to that. Often we'll feed oats whole. And if we look at our horses' manure, we can often see the whole oats in their manure. So if we want to improve digestibility and reduce the risk of fermentation or upsetting the gastrointestinal tract, then cooking them ideally or crushing them or micronizing them will improve that. But they're not an overall good source of nutrients. They're not, with the exception of phosphorus, they're not going to help meet mineral requirements. And they're nothing more really than doing not a lot more than providing a bit of energy. Having said that, there is some research, human research, showing beta-glucans, the type of fibre in oats, can be really beneficial. And that may be true to horses too, but we certainly want them to be digesting them better. So, cooking them or rolling them or crushing them. But overall, no, they're not a great source of nutrients. Good source of energy, or concentrated source of energy, should I say. But we certainly want to think about why we're feeding them, put it into context, how we're feeding them, and how we're meeting our horses' overall nutritional requirements, aside from oats.
Speaking about oats, I'm thinking racehorses. So I used to work, along with many other horse jobs, I worked in the racing industry for a few years, and I actually had a racing trainer's license at one
Fantastic.
stage. Yeah. One of the things that I learned, and I worked for a while for a very well-known trainer who'd won a premiership in Sydney, and quite a few other trainers as well. And they used to, the night before a race, they'd feed them. The morning of a race, they wouldn't feed them because they said any food in their stomach is going to make them run slower. Now, some races, they can be run at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. No, tell us a bit about, the myth that we shouldn't feed our horses before we ride them, before they exercise.
This is one of those questions where the devil's in the detail a bit. So if we look at highly concentrated, high grain feeds, if we went and gave our horses, heaven forbid, a couple of kilograms of oats in one go, or a large feed with high percentage of concentrates right before they exercise, then there's validation in that statement, in that when we feed our horses, blood flow goes to the stomach to help promote digestion. When our horses exercise intensely, that blood flow is diverted away from the stomach towards the working muscles. Now, if we give them a big high grain feed right before we go and gallop them or exercise them intensely, it's going to compromise digestion of that feed. It may make them more susceptible to colic, and it may result in more acid splash up in the stomach, which in terms of the top part of the stomach, which in terms of gastrointestinal ulcers isn't fantastic, or gastric ulcers. But here's where the detail is important. So we know that feeding fibrous feeds, particularly hay, so that long stem fibre, which requires a lot of chewing and a lot of bicarbonate production, and even more so lucerne hay, or if we've got US listeners, alfalfa hay, we know that that actually has a protective effect against gastric ulcers in our horses if it's given before we exercise them. So the way it does that is through a couple of mechanisms. So again, the production of saliva and those bicarbonate buffers, which, protect the stomach lining, but also the physical presence of that fibre provides, in essence, a mat in the stomach, which stops acid splash up into the non-glandular region in the stomach. So again, help you prevent ulcers there. And the calcium ions in the lucerne or the alfalfa, so lucerne hay or alfalfa hay, has a reasonable calcium content, helps to buffer some of that hydrochloric acid. So for those reasons, feeding hay, before, or lucerne hay if we can, if it's a normal part of their diet, before intense exercise is actually beneficial. And there's been a couple of nice little studies to support that. And one study in particular showing that there's no decline in athletic performance feeding roughage, so feeding hay, feeding lucerne hay prior to exercise. So completely withholding feed, no, we don't want to do that. Providing sufficient roughage, absolutely, right up until time of exercise. But certainly having a long, hard think about concentrated feeds, the size of the feed, and when we feed that in relation to when we exercise, particularly intense exercise, is well worth consideration. But completely withholding feed, and from different mechanisms, but also relating to preventing ulcers, withholding water, we need to seriously think hard about that one.
I love the way that you're just busting this, and from like, as I said, a lot of very like old bushies that have been with horses all their life, premiership winning racehorse trainers. Tell us a bit about bone health. We want our horses to be healthy. We want them to have healthy bones. Is calcium the answer for that?
Great question. And yeah, on bone health, it's a really important topic. And a lot of the cases I see, particularly on the thoroughbred side and particularly in the racehorse population, are bone issues or related to bone injuries or bone health or bone growth abnormalities or developmental abnormalities like OCD. So we certainly know that calcium is an essential mineral for bone health. in appropriate quantities, given the horse's life stage or growth stage, their age, their athletic requirements or their athletic status. We also know that there are so many other important minerals and vitamins too needed for good bone health. So certainly phosphorus, and again, having calcium and phosphorus in appropriate quantities and appropriate ratios to each other. Zinc is important for bone health, magnesium, manganese, vitamin K, which if our horses have healthy gut microflora, they can synthesize themselves. But again, if they've got factors like not enough dietary fiber, their high gut microbial population may not be able to produce the vitamin K that they need. Or if they're on omeprazole or ulcer medications, they may not be able to do that. So vitamin D, vitamin K, some of the B group vitamins, which again, those healthy gut microflora can synthesize. Their nutritional factors, as is sufficient protein in the diet, and particularly sufficient quality protein. So getting enough of essential amino acids like lysine, which are needed to make for healthy bone growth and development. From a dietary perspective, that's really important, but we also need to look at the management and exercise perspective. So we know that horses that spend significant time locked up in a stable or a small yard comparative to those that are out in a paddock and able to roam freely, those horses that get that incidental exercise out in paddock actually have better bone density and better bone strength and better bone development. So that's really worth keeping in mind, as is the state of, if we've got a yearling or a foal, how its mother was fed and managed in preconception and conception, and when that foal was born, has the ability to significantly influence its bone health long term. So we know that mares who are overweight and or mares that have insulin resistance, their offspring can have compromised bone health and bone integrity and orthopedic development abnormalities. So what we feed our horses is important. How we manage our horses is important. Medications we use are important, both directly and indirectly. Their activity and exercise levels are important, but when we have the ability to influence the health and management of the mare that horse is bred out of, we can also influence bone health for better or worse there. So they're worth noting in a young horse, so a weanling, a yearling, their growth and development rates are really important and influence bone health and integrity. So we want to be avoiding rapid growth rates and rapid growth spurts as much as possible, as we know that they can contribute to orthopedic developmental issues. And then from the other end of the spectrum, if we look at the use of drugs called bisphosphonates, which can be used in navicular syndrome, but there are instances around the world where they've been used what we call off-label in other situations, with the belief that they may prevent bone injury. The way they impact bone metabolism is they can increase the risk of fractures and compromise bone repair. So just being aware that, yes, diet is essential, but so is the way we manage our horses, their exercise levels, their growth rates if they're young horses, and certainly the medications we use. So calcium is absolutely essential to good bone health, but there's so much more to that. And I think it's an area that we're going to continue to learn more and more about, which is exciting.
I'm wrecking my brain now. I'm just thinking about a pony that, someone near me used to keep. And again, father was a bushie. And he said, if the horse needs minerals, you put out a mineral lick. If the horse needs minerals, it will take what it wants and then walk away. And this particular mineral block had molasses in it. And this fat little pony must have just about eaten the whole thing, within 24 hours. So is that the way we should be giving minerals and licks and things, just give them a free source that they can just help themselves to? Is that the way to do it?
Another great question, Glennis, and it's actually a really common misconception and something I really commonly see in practice too. So again, we all act, or I like to believe we act with our horses' best interests at heart, and we are okay. We know our horses need minerals. We understand that they need more than that's just in the grass. Horses are smart animals. Provide them with a mineral lick, they'll get all they need. With the exception of salt, there's no solid evidence to suggest that horses can seek out specific minerals in relation to their requirements. We know that horses have the ability to seek salt out as they need it. Not all horses will, but they do have the ability to do that. But with the other minerals, we've got no sufficient evidence. Now, with multi-mineral licks, Some people like to call them salt licks, but often when they refer to salt licks, they're often referring to fortified mineral licks. There's a few things that are very valuable to be cognizant of. So most of those licks are flavoured with molasses or other flavourants, which significantly influence some horses' desire to consume them. So out of anything else, particularly ponies and particularly, piggish horses, they'll just often go and lick those licks, or often they'll chew them in some cases, just because they want that sugar hit. Another drawback of mineral licks is going back to mineral bioavailability. So again, often really cheap forms of minerals are used in those licks. We have no control over how little or how much of those multi-mineral licks our horses consume. Even if they were fortified with really good minerals, which most of them aren't, we can't guarantee that they're meeting their mineral requirements. We can't guarantee that they're not excessively consuming some minerals. So it can be a really haphazard and really dangerous way to try and meet mineral requirements. Often mineral licks aren't fortified with the broad spectrum of minerals horses need. Often they'll only contain a few minerals. So again, they're going to still fall short of key minerals, even if they're consuming the ideal amount of the mineral lick. Most mineral licks have artificial substances added to them to prevent them from weathering in the rain. So that's well worth considering. If our horses were driven to consume them by their salt content, so through regulating their salt intake, it's not regulating the intake of the rest of their minerals. And we can't say, lick out, 90% of the salt in that, but leave the rest of the other minerals. They're not self-selective like that. And then one of the other main considerations, nutritional status aside, is you'll often see horses like really gouging those licks with their teeth, and what that does to their teeth enamel and the way it makes their teeth wear, I think is really quite concerning. So short answer is no. Free choice mineral licks and supplements don't provide all our horses' mineral needs in a way that we can guarantee they're meeting their nutritional requirements.
I've got another one before we finish off. If we want to increase our horse's performance, are iron and blood supplements the answer?
Good old iron and blood building supplements. Sounds like we're directing a bit of our conversation today towards racehorse trainers, as again, some of these things I see in racing populations more than others, but, still performance horses and endurance horses, I'll see iron supplements. So going back to sort of the Goldilocks nutrient requirements, iron is certainly essential for the production of hemoglobin, so the protein which facilitates carrying oxygen throughout the body, and also myoglobin, so the protein that carries oxygen to the muscle cells. And for those reasons, iron's really, really important for performance. But sufficient iron is required. Too much iron is a real danger and a real concern. And unlike if we want to draw parallels with humans, I think it's probably more common that we see iron deficiency in humans as opposed to iron overload or too much iron or hemochromatosis. In Australia in particular, and many parts of the world, our soils are actually naturally really, really high in iron, and particularly comparative to other minerals. So that means hay, grass, grains, feed sources, pretty much all our feed products have got some ingredients which are derived, from agriculture. They naturally tend to be really high in iron. And some of our better feed products, fortified feeds in Australia, won't add further iron to their feed mixes, in that iron is so high naturally occurring that we don't want to add more. The problem that we have with too much iron in our horses' diets, and again, use of these supplementations, is that iron causes what's called oxidation within the body, which is not at all healthy and causes damage to cells, muscles, immune cells. It can reduce performance. So, sufficient iron is important for athletic performance, but too much iron can certainly significantly compromise athletic performance. It drives inflammation. Inflammatory molecules need iron. And the more iron they've got, the more inflammation can be produced, which is going to hamper recovery and performance. We also know that excessively high iron compromises immune function. So again, we can potentially have performance horses that are at increased risk of injury and infection just due to the fact that we're supplementing with iron. So again, it's looking at minerals and nutrients in context for our individual horse and their overall health. And by and large, I'd be taking a very wide birth in terms of iron supplementation in our horses. And if we were to supplement it, we'd want to look at why our horses' iron levels are low in the first place. And then we'd probably be looking at gastrointestinal bleeding or something along those lines, in which case we wouldn't want to supplement iron in most cases anyway, because that could potentially make it worse. So, yeah, iron supplements, just be, really, really mindful, as for any supplements, really.
I think if anyone is interested, and I'm sure people are, I think I've got 3 steps. If you're interested and seriously interested in knowing more about your horse's health and nutritional needs, I think, first of all, re-listen to this chat, because Camilla gave us so much information. I didn't take it all down and, writing notes. It's easier for me to just go back and listen to it again rather than taking notes. I started taking notes, but anyway. The second one is, if you want to keep going along those, listen to Camilla's or other chats. But I think the third one, if you still like to know more, Camilla, if people need to contact you, what's the best way?
Absolutely, Glenys. They can jump on my website, which is all the W's, Optim Equine, so OPTIMEQUINE, all one word, .com. They will find Optim Equine on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, and on the Optim Equine YouTube channel. We've got all our previous conversations, so they can either go through horse chats, or they can go through my website, or they can jump onto YouTube. People are also welcome to contact me via email and phone, and those details are on my website too. So, and hopefully you'll put them in the show notes too, link them in. So
We'll do.
Yeah.
We're getting a little bit more technologically advanced now. We can actually get podcasts transcribed. They take a bit longer, but to get them transcribed, I think is the ultimate. But I think people listen to podcasts when they're driving, when they're out trail riding, or even just with a rake walking around the paddock picking up manure. So I think if you didn't get that, if you didn't write them all down, just simply go over to horsechats.com and do a search for Camilla, and you'll find all of Camilla's chats. And down the bottom of each of her pages, because we do a page for each chat, down the bottom, all contact details will be there. So then if you need to then contact Camilla, you'll be able to do it via Horse Chats and then through to her website. Camilla, again, thank you. Thank you for the information. I think, wow, really good. And we'd love to have you back again, as always, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks so much, Glenys. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Take care.
If you've enjoyed this chat, then please comment, rate and subscribe. If you'd like any changes or recommendations for guests, then please contact us through horsechats.com. And while you're online, have a look at the government-accredited courses at internationalhorsecollege.com. Registered Training Organisation 31352.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.